So welcome everyone. Welcome to the first BikeFit expert monthly discussion around saddle issue. My name is Guillaume Coutu. I'm the founder of PhysioVelo. I'm a French-based speaker, so I'll do my best today to be as bilingual as I'm able to be. And today my guest, but I should say my friend, Eric Moen, is joining us. We will do these monthly discussion together in order to help cyclists, in order to help also other bike fitter in a very humble way to discuss some bike fitting issues and to make cyclists at the end of the day a bit better on their bike. So we chose today, we will do the presentation, but let me first tell you why we choose the saddle issues as the first topic, first subject. I think it's for the last 8 years, I've been working as a full-time physiotherapist bike fitter with my own clinic in PhysioVelo. And for most of those years, I was able to find that the saddle is sometimes I'd like to say 90% of my job is position the saddle in order to make the cyclist stable on his or her bike. And when I'm able to position the goods, you need to have the good saddle at the good place. When you do that, everything usually is way more easier to do. So it's still, after 8 years, a challenge to to position the cyclist at the right, with the right saddle at the right place. It's still a challenge I see every day with my clients. Usually I do 10 to 18 clients a week. And today we chose the saddle issues because it's, I guess, one of the biggest issue with bike fitting and one of the biggest issue that the cyclist will encounter in their journey, in their cycling journey. So without further ado, can I say that, Eric? Is it the
Très bien.
Très bien. I will let you present yourself. I'm very glad that we can start this journey around bike fitting, monthly bike fitting discussion. I guess it's the first one and it won't be the last. So Eric, it's up to you.
Bonjour, hi. My name is Eric Moen, and I reside mostly in Seattle, Washington, but also sometimes down in Oregon in the United States. My bike fit journey, I've been a clinical practitioner for just over 30 years, and I started my bike fit work or clinical bike positioning work right when I started as a physio or physical therapist in 1992. The practice I currently have, I started in 2007, and that's the majority of what I see clinically is clinically related we'll say bike problems and bike fit issues. And so definitely there's a high level of practice. When I first started back in the early 90s, there really weren't there wasn't much in the world of clinical bike work, and so a lot of my education in that world was self-discovered through research, looking at biomechanical research, and some of the articles that were available that were starting to talk about bike fit related issues, bike injuries. And one of the things, to Guillaume's point, one of the things that we're seeing clinically, and one of the things you see when you survey research, is the concept that the saddle is one of the largest sources of pain-related syndromes. And to Guillaume's point as well, when you're looking at the position of the saddle, shape of the saddle, it's really that's where the majority of your weight on the bike is going. I sometimes jokingly, not jokingly, say saddle comfort is an oxymoron. And so there is some level of discomfort that's expected, but if there's obvious irregular problems with regards to weight bearing, what we'll see is a whole sequelae or chain of events that occur around intolerances of the saddle. So this is a great starting topic for us to have today. I look forward to our discussions, Guillaume.
Just to make sure people understand what is our relationship together, I think we can. I would like to ask you the question of how our friendship and co-working started, and then
Mm.
I can put my 2 cents in it.
Guillaume and Guillaume and I first met. I teach. I have a program called Bike PT, and it's an education program for primarily physios and physical therapists to learn about clinical bike practice. And Guillaume came to Seattle on several occasions to go through my series of BikeFit education classes, and then we started working together with regards to me coming out to Montreal to help teach class, and Guillaume uh, was excited to do more work in bike fit, and then we partnered to help bring education programs to uh, Canada in French. And Guillaume has been an outstanding resource with regards to our bilingual and international approach to the bike PT uh, message.
I think it's thank you. My my I can give you back all the good things. You brought me into a very nice work every day. I enjoy my work.
Mm-hmm.
I was I was a bicycle mechanic for 4 years before starting university. I was a triathlete. I was competing, and really this job of helping cyclists every day and triathletes be better on their bike is such a privilege to have this kind of passion around your work. So I will be forever grateful for this light that you shine on this
Mm-hmm.
profession with me. So we started. I went to Seattle. So first of all, yes, I'm based in Montreal. My physio velo clinic is based in Montreal, in Canada. So I was lucky enough to be bilingual enough to help you translate all this educational material that you were able to build over the years. It's really impressive. I think it's really important to do a good introduction, and then we can refer to this first monthly discussion when people will have question around the background.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for me, this story of your journey started in 1992. You were you were really at the beginning of this bike fitting concern era in the cycling world that emerged, that was born in the west coast of US. So can you tell us more about this, like how it started? How does the cycling industry and the cycling competitive world started to worry about being better on their bike position?
Good question. You know, I think when I first, so I'm a lifetime cyclist, bike racer, bike coach, bike in various disciplines. And when I first, I have to be honest that my interest in bike fit, bike positioning, really started out as personal. I have physical impairment, which creates asymmetry in my lower extremities or legs and feet, and so it wasn't just as easy as riding a bike, so to speak. And so it really had me asking questions, even pre-professionally in my physical therapy world, about how do I train at the level I need to in order without getting hurt, without encountering asymmetries and injuries and things like that. So I had some very practical, uh, interesting questions. And when you're when you observe, you have two young children, Guillaume, and I have two
And
aging adult children, and when you work with kids, you have a sense of kind of what their special skill sets are. And forever as a youth, I've always been interested in movement, motion, just the pedagogy of sport, whatever my sport of choice was. My childhood background: cycling, skiing, and soccer, football, and so whatever I was involved with, I was always interested in movement and motion. And so I like to say I found my people in my physio training, but really I would say that I was doing and dabbling with bike positioning, bike fit, before 92, before I got in, became a physio. I think uh, I would say I just started to get paid to do bike fit in 92. The origins of bike positioning, bike fit, I think one of the things that you look back to, there's all sorts of methods that coaches have used in the past with regards to bike positioning and bike fit. It's very interesting when you go back and look at, we'll say, the transition of bike position as seen by, if you look back in history and look at the old Tour de France riders. I found an old Tour de France rider picture, and it was very different than what today is. And so we have seen this progression of position on the bike when we say racer biased, we see that we're looking for marginal gains, and largely the position these days is looking for marginal gains in aerodynamics, which is largely applicable to a very small percentage of the world in bicycling, but everybody tries to be your Tour de France hero. And so there are some conflicts out there with regards to a person's ability to be in a position and their body's capability of being in a position. That being said, when we take a look at bike fit and the history of bike fit, we had coaches who had recommendations. Certainly, when Greg LeMond won the Tour de France, and how could a U.S. rider win the Tour de France? He all of a sudden he had his method of bike fit that became popular, and he had researched it. Greg was very, Greg, to his credit, is very clever and researched in his approach to training. And he had a method of positioning himself on the bike, and because he won the Tour de France, that was the authority. If you win a race, you have authority, or that's what everybody else should do. After that, there were things like Bike Fit Kit, which came about, which was essentially anthropometric measures where you measured leg length, torso length, arm length, and then you had your choice of, do I want a position of a racer or do I want a position of a recreational rider? So you had your A or B choices with regards to position. And then you started to have clinicians do bike positioning stuff as well. There was on the west coast of the United States, there's a physio named Randy Ice who started doing some bike fit stuff, and started to. There was like one class that was taught on clinical bike. He worked with cardiac rehabilitation programs, and so definitely bicycle was a critical thing there. And they had some size challenge people, as you would imagine, in cardiac rehab programs. And then when we start looking at the popularization of clinical bike, that really, Colorado had something to say about that. Certainly the early adopters, one gentleman of whom I consider a strong, we'd say, professional, inspiration, I guess, is a guy named Ed Burke. Ed Burke was a researcher, PhD, did a lot of work with USA Cycling, was science director in like 84 84-ish, 84-ish for the LA Olympics, or the Olympics in Los Angeles, and continued on to consult until the time of his untimely death in, I guess it was 2002. But he was a gentleman who I got great inspiration from. He was also working with these other Colorado subjects, a guy named Andy Pruitt, who was in Boulder, and Andy went on to partner with Specialized to do BikeFit stuff. So those were some early other inspirations. I had the chance to meet those gentlemen in the early 90s in the formation of my stuff. They were just starting to talk about this stuff clinically. They authored a paper. There's also a few other people who were involved in that. It was mostly kind of groups that Ed Burke kind of corralled in. Ed did a huge body of work in bicycling research, high-tech cycling. I think he did like 3 or 4 different research compendium type books that were out there at the time. And so I'd say Ed was largely responsible for gathering these people and pushing messages. Also, at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of, and mid 90s, there was a lot of biomechanical research being done by Mari Hull at UC Davis. And so that's a really, if you like math and physics, it's a really good read. But that's, those things started talking about bike biomechanics, BikeFit, also pedaling mechanics. Jeff Broker was a biomechanist who did really some nice work in pedaling. And so there was some really early stuff that implied bike fit, bike positioning. And so what it was sort of missing was this whole idea of how do you apply it clinically to averaging populations who just want to ride their bike rather than compete at the highest level. Because really the vast majority of people we see clinically are, this is not to be a slight in any means, but they're average bicyclists. They're not like that top 0.1% contesting the world championships and the Tour de France. They're not everyone is 20 years old and have been riding the bike for 5 or 6 years at the highest level.
Sometimes I like to tell them that they are not earning money with that. So it's kind of a
Yeah,
perspective like this is not how you pay the mortgage on the house.
that's
It's
right.
just to put it in perspective with the client, and this is not to undervalue what they are doing. It's just
Right.
they are not the professional cyclists. And regarding that matter, uh, it's kind of a bummer that all this is it true to say that all this knowledge around bike fitting, because it's related to money and research, usually it's all those research that sometimes are good or average, or some of them are less scientific, we would say. They are always mostly related to professional cyclists, because this is where there's money. So sometimes it's harder to address a bike fitting issue, because all we have is documentation and studies on this 1% cyclist. So our job, and I think we will come to that later in the discussion, is all about assessing the cyclist needs and cyclist limitation in order to put him or her on the bike as
Mhm.
comfortable as they are, as they can
Yeah,
be.
and so back to just another quick little note on the bike
Yep.
fit history thing. So in the kind of 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, you started to see this schism or splitting, not splitting, but you started to see um, this change in direction of industry-based bike fit versus clinical-based bike fit, and really the industry-based bike fit is directed more towards bike shop employees, coaches, etc. So it was more accessible to that, and in the 2000s, industry began to monetize the BikeFit process, and obviously the big, I'll say the big in the United States, the big characters that came to play were Specialized and Trek, and so Specialized, I'll say, does a fabulous job of marketing and developing programs, and so they did their body geometry program, and then Trek followed suit and did their bike fit programs, and were requiring bike shops to take these classes to better enable an experience of a person when they bought their bike. Also, just a nod on the industry side, there's Paul Swift of BikeFit.com was early on in the game, and he had he's one of the guys who pushed the concept of the use of wedges between cleat and shoe as a means to try to bias forefoot positioning to then affect motion movement upstream at the knee and the hip. And so those are certainly things. And so when you look at industry-based stuff, there's generally oftentimes a motivation to sell products, whether it's programs or widgets around BikeFit. Certainly Specialized has their widgets that they sell around BikeFit. Trek, not as much. Definitely BikeFit.com has their stuff that they sell to aid their bike fit process.
To their credit, I think it's really because mostly of them that the bike fitting took so much place in the cyclist's mind. I think their
Mhm,
marketing
mhm.
strategy was, and for good reason. I think if the bike fit is way off, you won't be able to enjoy your cycling journey as much. So,
Mhm. Well,
regarding,
that's a strong marketing message. So
yep.
if you, and I will tell you that clinically, I don't, to my fault. I'll say I'm horrible. I really don't do marketing much at all. And I'll say Guillaume has graciously dragged me into these things. So I guess that'll be some form of marketing. But the thing is if you get a person on a bike and you make them comfortable and allows them to function well, and their goals are achieved and they have a great time doing it, then that word of mouth is just magic. So when you start having people have more comfortable experiences on their bike where they can achieve whatever they want to on their bike within reason, then that speaks volumes. I mean, that's a huge, we'll say, marketing moment right there. So if you're truly doing brand promise in bike fit, if your bike fit processes work well, that's the magic in marketing, not so much like showing, you know, the world champ riding your product. That works, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee success.
And at the end of the day, your clinic is full of cyclists. You
Yeah.
don't have enough time to bike fit, so it's
Yeah.
really you have so much other big strength that marketing is not uh, is not necessary for you right now. I guess it's just
Yeah.
now we have other goals to teach and to do more educational stuff, and I think the communication side is really important. And the
Absolutely.
the key for us is always to deliver on these promises, and
Hmm.
the word of mouth is the strongest uh, marketing marketing communication you could have. So that's why the clinic are full of cyclists that need help with their position.
That's right.
I'm sure that most of our listener, our viewers are interested in knowing what is a bike fit process in our mind, in our clinic,
Mm-hmm.
just to put some credibility to what we are trying to do with this YouTube channel and this communication project around bike fitting expert. I just need to say that I choose the bike fit expert as a name because uh, I should say full-time bike fitter instead of expert. It's up to them to decide if we are expert in this field, but it's a catchy name and I like marketing, so that's why I chose this. But it's really up to the viewers or the listeners to choose if we look like expert, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so can you explain us what what does a bike fit process in the bike PT way, like a
Mhm.
bike fitting process with a physio? What does an assessment look like?
Yeah, thanks, Guillaume. The when we talk about the evaluation of a cyclist clinically, it really, I like to say it's no different than how we would treat people otherwise in a physio way or physical therapy way. We first of all take a thorough history that's related to why they're there, uh, and the history tells you so much. And so there's really, it's a good clinician can gather a ton of information with a reasonable, thorough um, uh, uh, job interview, so to speak. And then after that, from a physio perspective, we have to understand how people move or how they don't move, what their coordination is, what their coordination isn't. And so the physio or physical therapist is really, to me, a critical is really a critical source of information and knowledge with regards to the machine part of the bicycle. And so the human body really has its positional and postural tolerances. You can advantage and disadvantage strength and coordination by simple positioning on the bike. And so it's good to understand the musculoskeletal dynamics prior to having them on the bike. Then once we've gone through that, then we look at their bike and evaluate, just get a baseline of what their position or what their equipment is. We look for forensic information, meaning we look at their shoes, we look at their cleats, we look at their pedals, we look at the saddle, the seat post, bars, stem. All those things hold little bits of information and clues as to what their experience is on the bike. And then certainly the next important step is to look and see how they use their equipment. And so clinically obvious, we can't have them go out and chase them around for 10 to 15 miles or 20 to 30 kilometers, but we put them on a stationary bike and make
I think I
observations.
think it's a very important point to say that
Mhm.
uh, because it's a question that it's on everybody's lips right now
Mhm.
that we use the bike of the client when we do
Oh,
the bike
yes,
fit. You
absolutely.
you you add some other technology that you tried, and the point is that usually we start and finish the session with the bike that the clients brought in.
Absolutely. So that is a good point, Guillaume. When we see them clinically, I want to see them with their bike that they're having issue with or that they have questions about. And so from a clinical standpoint, in some ways, there are some bikes that are out there that are automated kind of fit bikes. Uh, there's 3 or 4 different brands, and they're not the person's bike, but you can get put into a certain position. But really, in ways, we're wasting time with that um, in a clinical sense. So we start with the person's bike of question. We put it on the trainer. We have them ride it. We just have them do a warm up, and we make observations of how they're moving, how they're using their equipment, where their hands are, what are their spinal positions, how do their legs look? Are the legs looking like they're moving well, or are they just whipping all over the place? And so they're, as physios, we are trained to observe and note motion and understand the implications of our musculoskeletal evaluation to watching a person move. So if a person has a wiggly leg, it may not necessarily be the position of the bike. It may be that their hip is immobile or they have a weird ankle. And so we will have hopefully already understood that through our processes. And certainly during any time we can have the person get off their bike and do further musculoskeletal evaluation. But I'll say that's the physio's superpower. We all have our superpowers. Certainly the bike mechanics and bike shop people have their superpowers in product knowledge. mechanical workings of the product. The physio can come up to that. I know, Guillaume, you have mechanical background, as do I. I've
This
been
is
tearing
this
apart
is
bikes forever.
yeah, this is the biggest challenge for a new clinician if they want
Yes,
to enter
absolutely.
this field, because it's so much stuff to learn. I have a team now of four other physio working with me, and they all do bike fitting for more than like a couple of years, and they are trained, but most of all they practice each day
Yeah,
to screw, unscrew, discover, look for forensic on the bike, and this is a never-ending process because of new
correct.
technology coming
Oh, yeah.
on the industry. And sometimes they ask me like, "Oh, can you do us like in clinic on uh, non-formal education about uh, new technology?" And I'm like, yeah, but we will need to do it like every other week because there's so much stuff going on in the industry, and at the
Yes.
end of the day you need to have some good mechanic skill in order to I don't know, change a stem, change an handlebar, uh, unfix seized seat post, are very funky stuff. But it's important for the clinician listening or viewers that want to take this journey of bike fitting. I think it's not a prerequisite to start. You just need the will to learn.
Yes.
It's the most important stuff because we all started as beginners, but now it looks obvious and simple, but it's just a matter of doing it 100,000 times. So yeah, that looks
You're
easy.
10,000 hours.
You're 10,000 hours. So we need to circle back to the saddle issue
Yes.
presentation that we started.
Wait, what?
Uh, the what? So we will get back to this, and I encourage the viewers and the listener to leave some comments under the video so we can in February next month we can do the Q&A around those questions. I think it will be very fun because the first will be lead by us with our question, but then it will be lead by the viewers and the listeners, and that will be very fun. It will be less work for us. We just follow the flow. So saddle issue. So this is January 2023, and we are starting this BikeFit expert monthly discussion journey with the saddle issue. So if we take this slide 5, why did we choose the saddle? I think I did a small marketing at the beginning why we choose saddle, but I would like to hear you on that.
Why we choose the saddle?
Like, yeah, because we wrote
Yeah.
some stuff in the slide, and I guess as a lecture, we will give our why did we choose saddle,
Yeah.
and we will
The,
explain.
yeah, we chose saddle because one, that's where the majority of weight bearing is on the bike. Most of your body's weight interacts through the saddle. And your ability to tolerate the weight bearing and to your ability to tolerate the weight bearing affects position, posture, handling of the bicycle, how you weight shift, how you establish the center of mass, how you corner, how you do a lot of things. And the other reason is it's one of the largest pain complaints. So when we get people coming in, people are like, the saddle's killing me. And so when you look at like what are, as I like to say, low fruit options, what are the easiest things we address that are most impactful on the bike? The saddle really, it's really it. And then the other thing is when we talk about saddle comfort, there's certainly some current things that are out there that would suggest here's what you do to pick your correct saddle. But there are so many variables around saddle shape, size, construct, and material that there. it's more than just the marketing that's out
Yes.
there with regards to the industry side of things. And then also we will review that it's not sometimes just the saddle; it's also the thing that influences the saddle's position with regards to seat posts. And so we will talk through some of those issues today.
Yes, so for the game plan of this presentation, plan de match in French, uh, our goal is we try to simplify the stuff, and as people can now understand, we prefer long answer than short answer because these are complex questions. So if we would like to do short form content on that, it would be a big challenge. So today we chose two sides to this question, like how to choose your saddle, what influenced the choice of your saddle, and what influenced the position of the saddle. One of the thing also I would like to add before we keep going with this saddle issue discussion is really the genitals part. So the genitals is really a discussion that we have every day in clinic with more than like 50, more than half of the clients, they have genital issue. It could be numbness, it could be sores, I think it's called. And
Yep.
so there's big issue with the saddle, and these are not normal. Unfortunately, people tend to assume that saddle issue are kind of a, it's a bummer, but it's what it is, and
Yeah.
they injure stuff that they shouldn't.
Yeah. So, Guillaume, when we talk about kind of the origins of why people have issues, it's vascular, so blood supply. When you're irregularly being compressed at midline, it cuts off blood supply, which then creates pain. Um, it can be neurological. Certainly, we have sensitive neurological tissue going through midline at that saddle interface. And so there's definitely, when we compress and irritate inflamed nerves, that can create, we'd say, electrical cutoff problems, or which might be numbness or motor weakness, meaning you don't have muscular control of distal parts. And then there's also the just the generalized tissue compression and shear, which will result in sores. And then certainly when we talk about saddle related issues, which is not so much construct, but sort of construct, is people get things like cysts or infections, and that's usually related to chronic skin irritations or sore. When we do have like an open sore, if you're not taking care of yourself well with like clean cycling shorts, taking
Rest.
care of your skin well, yeah, and rest, then they can manifest and grow in the magnitude or the size of the tissue dysfunction. And so there really are these different issues, but the primary one is usually pain related, and it's good to understand: is it a vascular issue, is it a neurological issue, and or is it stuff? And the vascular and neurological is more midline and center. The saddle sore related things are usually more lateral, off midline.
And even though we both are men, we are not just talking about men's related issue. We really
Right.
encounters issues in both physiology, and
Yes.
I'm glad that in clinic people are more open to talk about it, and I'm also glad that all my colleagues are feminine physio, so
Mhm.
sometimes women choose to go with my colleague because they feel more comfortable sharing those information. And you also have like colleague that from the opposite sex that can help you manage those things that some people are not comfortable sharing.
That's correct. But regardless of male, female, we share the commonality of midline sensitivities, vascular and neurological,
Yes.
and lateral skin lesions, and so or saddle sores. So really, as much as there are anatomical differences, there's of shape and structure. We
Yeah,
all,
there are a
we
lot
all
of
share
similarities around
yeah, I
those
mean,
bike fit issue. Yeah,
yeah, in ways it's pretty much. I'm not going to say it's the same, but it's pretty. Your approach is pretty similar to either.
yeah. The protocol to find a solution
That's right.
are mostly identical.
That's
Uh,
right.
okay, so let's dig in the saddle choice. So I think it's a very important part of the this presentation. Uh, we choose to talk about the width, the shape, the decompression channel, and the material of the channel. So this is the next four slides of this presentation. It's about the width of the saddle, the width that the retailer says it
Mhm.
measure versus the real one. We'll talk about the shape. There's a variety, a wide variety of shapes in the cycling industry. There's also this decompression channel that began like 15 years ago, something like that. And then there's materials. Sorry, I'm younger.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy to think that this is something I also wanted to say when you were talking about the bike fit history, and I'm glad that you can share that. It's always so much fun for someone like me who's passionate about this subject. But the thing is always to remember that this science is young, and that means that what was done 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it's still in people's mind. People are still looking for stuff that may be right now outdated, but it's such a young science that people are confused. Even us, we are looking at new stuff coming in, and we always have our clinical judgment asking, oh, is it really an improvement or is this just something else that might not solve the real problem behind the bike fit. And one of the thing I really enjoy into the my 10,000 hours that I probably did a couple of years ago, it's it mostly come down always to the same thing, bike fitting. But it's hard. The hardest part is to convince someone that did it was that simple. Like the saddle was still too high, the saddle width is not the right one. We can. It's really a nice feeling to have after 10,000 hours to discover that finally it your job gets I don't know. It's not bad, but it can seems like that when I'm talking that it's simpler with time to understand those conditions because you have seen so much of them. You have seen so much. People are like they all feel different, and for good reasons they feel different. But the problem with saddle, if we take just saddle issues, they are mostly always. Sometimes it's harder to find a good saddle for someone, but saddle issue are the bread and butter of what we do every day.
Yeah, and saddle issues, I think is sometimes limited to what people can get their hands on. There's so much
Yeah,
product variability in the market that, and during pandemic, uh, the supply was really off, and so there was like, oh yeah, we have all these great saddles, but you just couldn't get them, and so your ability to, you sometimes are just kind of picking and choosing what's the least of the evils that you can get a hold of for your bike.
if we start with the shape, so
Mhm.
the shape of the saddle, um, like you choose to if we go to slide 8, the shape of the saddle,
Mhm.
there's a Y shape, a T shape. The surface can be curved, can be flat. The transition. This is something very interesting. The transition that we talked together when we were teaching last time in Europe, and this is a very interesting subject to look at the transition of the saddle and the implication of how they feel for the same width. So it's interesting to go look at this. So I will let you talk a bit with slide 8 about different shape
Sure.
available.
Yeah, I think bicycle saddle shapes historically have been a Y type shape, and the Y shape is wider in the back and more narrow in the middle, 1/3, and forward 1/3. I like to describe saddles essentially in thirds. What's the width at the back? What's the width at the middle? What's the width at the front? And so the Y shape is definitely, if you look at the Y, that's essentially the classic shape of saddles, of bicycle saddles. The T shape or a V shape is really more, I'll say, more popularized uh, these days. And I will specialized with their power saddle, really popularized this style of saddle. When you look across the industry, pretty much everyone has made their tribute saddle to the power saddle. And the power saddle, or these V or T type or V or T type saddles, are more. What they do is they have the thing that probably sets them apart is they have a really wide middle 1/3. When we look at the original design of the power saddle, their original research was along the realms of how to, prioritizing midline relief. And so when you prioritize midline relief, sometimes you have to make compromises elsewhere. And I would say that this more contemporary shape of saddle has challenges with regards to its middle 1/3 width for most riders.
Yeah, so you were able probably to, if we just take a few seconds, a few minutes to talk about that, you're able to provide some relief in the center line, but unfortunately, those saddle what we experiment is not for everyone. Some people they tolerate that very
Mm-hmm.
very easily, and it's just when we talk about saddle, it's very important to understand that what works for someone won't work for the neighbor. It's really a matter of like each saddle, each person have a different position and comfort. So it's really, really not a matter of this works with me, so you should buy it. But to come back to the V shape, unfortunately, what we see for people who doesn't enjoy those saddle is really the lateral issue with the I just have it in French, frottement. So when it's chafing, is it
Chafing or
Chaf-
frictioning. Yeah.
frictioning on the sides? So because it's so wide in the middle third, and so this is what we usually see in clinics. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you can
That
have
that's the
you
that's the
can
usual intolerance is people
yeah.
complain about it hurts at my hamstring and adductor tendon. I feel like it's getting sawed off or compressed or frictioned or sheared.
So the nice thing with saddle is also the worst thing with saddle is that there's like 1,000 shape available. So
Mhm.
it can be a money pit, but the nice part is that you can probably find a saddle that fits you. It's a matter of having the option to try them on, and yeah. So to follow up with the curve and the flat profile, can you tell us a bit more about the difference of
Sure.
tolerance between the curve and the flat profile?
Yeah. So when you look at a saddle, manufacturers have approached this somewhat differently. There's some saddles that have just a flat transition across the back edge of the saddle, and there's kind of a squared edge to it. So it really, what I like to say is maintains its width when you have a flat back saddle. Uh, Most saddles have a transitioned edge to it, and there's a point that that's probably one of the better saddles to have because that allows the leg to more freely work through the pedal stroke. However, there's a point of diminishing returns to that curve, so to speak. So if saddles are too curved or too downwardly turned on the edges, then it really diminishes your ability to weight bear on the ischial tuberosities or the butt bones, and you end up over pressuring the midline, or what I'll call undercarriage. You end up pressuring tissues that shouldn't be overpressured, by saddles that are too curved. Too curved. When we talk about the curve, it diminishes or lessens the apparent width of the saddle. So we have to be careful that we're so, for example, the contemporary, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, the contemporary way of getting a saddle for a person is to look at their ischial tuberosity width or to assess that, and then to try to roughly correlate that at some level to a chosen width of saddle. So if you choose a width of saddle based on that, and then choose a really curved one, that saddle will seem more narrow than what the ischial tuberosity width would suggest.
Exactly, and I think without wasting time, we will already go to the ninth slide about the width. So when you talk about the ischial tuberosity, we are talking about what people may refer to as sit bones. So
Mhm.
this is
Yeah.
something like the as we like to call it, the assometer to measure like the sit bone. It's in French we say the mesure fesse. So we don't really measure the ass, the fesse. We are
That's
just
right.
looking at the sit bone, and this is important to
Guillaume,
yes,
not to, well, I'd like to butt in. The assometer of which you referred to is a specialized term.
yes,
And
yes.
so that,
Oh, I
and
didn't
so,
know.
so it's not necessarily across the industry. So
Mm.
I just like to refer, I just like to refer to it as your ability to assess the ischial tuberosity width, and it, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but certainly that was started out by industry. Yeah.
And the important point about this, thank you for this precision. It's the fact that the width that you measure,
Hmm.
depending on your aggressivity on the bike position of your trunk angle, might not be for those who have a more lean forward position on the bike, might not be, we might not be able to measure the real width of the bone on the saddle because we are
Hmm.
unable to what we call in French rameau pubien. So I don't know how you see the prolongation that goes to
Yeah, pubic rami.
pubic UMI. So
That's my translation from the French.
yeah, thank you. You're doing great, huh? You with your French
Merci
class.
beaucoup.
So it's important to see that it's a starting point, but usually we are able to do a lot of work with that in clinic.
Yeah.
It's a very good starting point when we have a very too wide or usually very much more often than not the too narrow saddle.
Yeah, and exactly, Guillaume. It is a starting point because of, we'll say, anatomical variations, positional variations on the bike, uh, individual pressure sensitivity, uh, transitions of the saddle, whether it's a sloped or curved or flat. Those are variables that all come into play. So when we are doing these ischial tuberosity measures, I like to say it's the start of a conversation. It doesn't say, "Oh, you have to have this type of saddle," because that's it's one way to sell a saddle, but it's not necessarily when people come to us, they're looking for individual solutions. So they're not necessarily just the one saddle because you're this width doesn't necessarily work.
It's very important to address that because sometimes people are looking at the bike fitting process as a exact science that is dictated by math,
Hmm.
mathematical mathematical calculus. So
Yeah.
your bike fitting is not about the bike; it's it's about the cyclist. So the body is not something that you can assess in mathematical terms. Usually, it's
Yeah. Direct correlation is what you're referring to, and so
yes,
it's you can't, it's the same thing back with, I mean, you see these things over and over. Back, I had mentioned the fit kit where
yes,
people would do anthropometric measures and you say, oh, this is the fit of your bike.
that's it.
And this is the same thing, it, industry wants to have a solution to, and I think industry would say, well, it starts with the conversation, but you know, oftentimes it's portrayed as you have this width, therefore you should have this saddle. And by the way, that is dependent on the person who's doing the ischial tuberosity measurement actually doing it reasonably and understanding, asking questions of how the person rides. So you're alluding to the fact that, are they low trunk, are they high trunk angle? Um, those questions sometimes aren't asked. So sometimes we'll say the bike shop employee, when they're assessing ischial tuberosity, or even the physio, who cares who it is, if they're assessing that ischial tuberosity width and just going with that and saying this is your saddle based on width, may not work.
Can you give us some hope?
Well, as I said, it's the start of the conversation, and it also goes back to actually asking very meaningful questions of the patient or client and understanding what their goals are. I mean, that's really the basis of physio. We'd say physio world is understanding the person's background, history, goals, and that helps you better decide or guide a person to, we'd say, equipment choices, independent of saddle, equipment choices on their bike. It really comes down to understanding your client and their needs and goals.
My hopeful comment on that is that I see clients in clinic who never had saddle issue. They are
Oh yeah,
blessed.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
They're like, I can ride anything. I don't have a problem with whatever saddle I ride. I'm like, wow, don't say it too loud.
They're the unicorn. They're definitely like there are some people out there who are just, we'd say, lead butts, and they can tolerate anything, and it's really surprising. But they're when we take a look at the bell curve of riders of saddle tolerance, you have the people who are, they can ride anything in whatever position, it doesn't matter. And then you have, we'd say, people who are really sensitive, very sensitive, no matter what, they're going to have problems with any saddle. And then the vast majority of people, the bigger part of the bell curve, if we control variables of saddle positioning, then things go okay.
Let's go to the 11th slide about the material used in the saddle construction. There's a lot of I think concern with cyclists about the weight, but there's also a very important concern that is less talked about with the tolerance, the longevity of the saddle. So
Mhm.
which material are used and how uh, they will change or not change over time the capacity of the saddle to weight bear the cyclist.
Yeah. So um, all things break down over time, and so when you look at bicycle saddles, we have to acknowledge that that's, as previously acknowledged, it's where the vast majority of a bicyclist's weight will sit uh, for prolonged periods of time. And so when you look at materials, whether they're plastic, whether they're leather, whether they're carbon, the plastic will break down over time. All plastics are not created equally. They have different chemical compounds. Some are softer, some are more firm. And a saddle made one year of a certain make and model may have they may slightly change the chemical makeup of that plastic, and so the saddle may degrade more quickly over time. When you take a look at saddles with significant cutouts, that decreases the amount of material that's actually supporting your weight uh, on the bike. And so, with that higher pounds per square inch on a smaller surface, that can also quickly degrade. I think one of the things when we look at saddles in general, a new saddle will have a certain feel to it. Old saddles will be saggy and broken down. And I kind of I say I do the squish test if you will, of the saddle, and you just lean and push down on the saddle to see how it's doing. Is it easily give and break down, or is it staying somewhat in a normal saddle feel? And so that's the acknowledgement of that. So when we talk about, gosh, if we were to cover all the saddles, it'd be a long day. But
Yes.
when we think about the variable of decompression, we're talking about midline decompression, and so there's things like cutouts, and there's things like decompression channels, and those are the two main um, ways of decompressing that midline. Georgina Terry, I'll give a nod to Georgina Terry, uh, who a long time ago did what I'd say is probably the first commercially produced cutout saddle to better provide comfort for women cyclists. And we'll say the men at their original uh, look or pass at that were very like, that's only for women. And then men wised up. They finally got it, and they're like, oh, that could help me. And so, really, there's been a, a everybody's got a cutout saddle or a decompressed saddle these days. You've also seen research, clinical research that talks about, and anatomical research that talks about the perils of midline compression. And we know that saddles with some form of decompression, whether it's a cutout or just like a decompression channel, can, and I'll say can, help lessen the amount of midline compression of vascular, neurological, and just anatomical structure.
Just to finish on this slide about the material, it's really important for cyclists to understand that if they switch from chromo to carbon rails or aluminum to carbon or vice versa, there's a need to look at the seat post clamp to make sure that these fits accordingly in order to prevent some damage or worse. So it's a part of the mechanical part of our job, but today is not the intent to dig deep in that.
Right, right. Just the further definition. The chromoly rails are a certain round diameter, and then the carbon rails are a wider diameter, just for mechanical security in their attachment. And so you have to be careful with your chosen seat post to interact with the carbon versus chromoly.
Let's jump to the 12th slide about the decompression channel that we already started talking about. Uh, the full cutout versus there's a different variety of cutout. Not all cutout are made equal. They are not made equal for decompression. They are not made equal because some of them are just a slight curve down to decompress, and it doesn't impair the material shape of the saddles. So there's a lot of option around them. Um, I would like to point out that we will finish this talk with the positioning of the saddle, and it's important to stay until the end because the position of the saddle, it's really a major point of getting
Mhm.
comfort on the bike. Because if you think that you have genital numbness, it might be related to the height setback or tilt of the saddle, and you might want to look into different saddles, but unfortunately, if the saddle is not well positioned, you might never end this journey of finding the right saddle.
Correct.
I had enough coffee for a good English conversation this morning.
You're
I'm
doing great. We're
okay.
doing great.
You could go ahead, Eric, with the compression just to round
Well,
up.
I talked a little bit about that, and we might go back. And I apologize to jump around. I kind of quickly passed over materials and materials of saddle with regards to foam versus gel versus carbon based, kind of the shell. The When we look at all these things, we look at, I think one of priorities of industry is to offer saddles that are light. And when we talk about light saddles, the challenge with a light saddle is they'll either be poorly padded or they'll break down quickly. And so you're going to pay for a lot within a saddle, and they're going to, it may not give you the promise you're looking for in a saddle. With regards to the prioritization of light saddle, it really comes down to what we'll say what the pros are using, and these are generally really low BMI people. They're 4 to 5% body fat. They're very slight. They're usually usually well under 170 pounds. And then also they ride the bike 40 hours a week, and they're 20. Uh, they're not 50. So a 20-year-old can get away with a lot more than a 50-year-old can. So when we talk about these saddles, again, back to the prioritization of light, when you're looking at the performance at the highest level, it's the weight of the bike and the weight of the person which optimizes that point of marginal gain. So if we're looking at how do I climb a hill the fastest, I certainly need to have a light bike, which includes a saddle. And so that's how you can create those marginal gains. But for the vast majority of the population, that's not the saddle they probably need. And because one, they're not 20 and they're not riding the bike 30 to 40 hours a week. And so, but if that's the only saddle they're seeing, and that's going to make them ride as fast as whoever won the Tour de France last year, then that's what they will naturally lean towards. So it's having that perspective. And really the great thing about the market right now is there's so many different choices in saddles. There really are. And so to acknowledge that and really when we look at saddles and the leaning towards light, you move away from things like foam. So foam had traditionally been working pretty reasonably well compared to gels. Gels sometimes overpromise and underdeliver as to their level of padding and comfort on a saddle, especially for an older person. So um, I don't know. It's you really, again, it comes back to asking why people are wanting to try the saddles that they think are the best, and then being able to talk about the merits or the values of each material as to how it might meet the needs of the client.
Thank you so much. Now it's time for the funny part about our skills because we don't build saddles. You and I, we don't have
That's right.
saddle business. So, slide 13, I put some pictures of our last um, teaching in France with the French Cycling Federation. There was a bike that we bike fit with a lot of setback on the saddle. And
Mhm.
the funny story about this picture is we should record story about those pictures because it's always fun to explain why this happened or why this
Yeah.
might have happened. But the screw under were so loose that probably
Mhm.
with the action reaction process of pedaling, the saddle moved back at the end of the the saddle was unable to go further back on the rail. So this is a funny situation. The guy didn't have very long femur, so this position was very
Mhm.
uncomfortable. And this is a funny introduction to what we know what we know best, the saddle position. So to simplify this part, because we can we yeah, we can talk a lot about that also. We will.
Yeah.
I
Just
would encourage people to leave their comments in the under the video. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
yeah. From a clinical perspective, one of the things for this saddle position, to me, it's irregular for various reasons. Just in like visual, it's what I would call a red flag or a yellow flag, something of concern.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
it's always interesting to ask your client, um, how did you achieve this saddle position? Was there any thought in this? because it's very telling as to what a person knows,
Yes.
and they might have a strategy, and so it's good for you to understand what their strategy was when you if you come in and say, oh, this is all wrong, this is horrible, why are you doing this? You're not
Right.
appreciating, you're not
No,
appreciating the client, and
I
so
think I think it's a very important aspect of the clinical job that we do. Sometimes
yeah,
it's like you said, how much do they know about bike? I think it's whatever your level of competence is, you deserve a good bike fit. So we're not judgmental about that. The question is more like, how did you come up with this bike fit?
yes,
Is there anything I should know?
yes,
You probably did some stuff because you knew or you didn't knew.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then another question we ask, we started to ask this during the COVID time because everyone was very stressed out, and we improve our I don't know if I talked to you about that, but we improved the questionnaire that we send
hmm,
before the bike fitting appointment, and we ask, is there anything you don't want us to touch on your bike? Is there some
oh,
apprehension? Is there some stuff that you really you really have fear about? And
yeah,
then we were able to, one time out of 10, we were able to save the appointment because we asked this question that sometimes it's relevant. For us it it wouldn't have been a concern, and finally it's very relevant for the cyclist. So I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
one of the clinical aspect of bike fitting that shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, and again, back to the idea of just asking your client, it's like there's some things that when we see them with their bike, when we see them, clearly when I see this saddle, I have concerns, and so I'll ask, how'd you get into this position? What's your bike fit history? And then also, before I just go making changes, I discuss what I'm seeing, and it's really in healthcare, it's permissive work, and so you're asking them, um, these are the things I'm seeing. Do you give me the clearance to do this? And I think with the majority of the people that are coming to see me, they have vetted me through the internet, and they're willing and able to do most everything. But I always check to see if they have concerns with regards to changes in position or recommendation of equipment, and I give them the option to accept it or not. And if they don't accept it, then I typically go through and tell them, well, these are the things that I would expect of intolerance if you maintain this position, or here's the pros and cons of it, and so that they can make an informed decision with regards to their interaction with their bike.
And this also comes down to a very simple principle that unfortunately is not addressed well sometimes. The fact that the bike fitting is all about the cyclist, and the fact that are they comfortable to ride. Sometimes unfortunately there's some bike fitting process that doesn't take the cyclist needs or perception or feelings and sensation on the bike enough in the plan, in the bike fitting process. And I always feel like I ask the client, and sometimes they want to be guided. It's always
Mhm.
a paradox that they want to be guided, but I need their input to make the right move. So I think a bike fitting process should always be uh, the goals should always be for the cyclist to reach comfort. Uh,
Yes.
and this is sometimes it's not the case. So just for the
Yeah.
cyclist and the listeners and the viewers to remember that this is the primary goal of a bike fitting. It's not to increase your performance, because if we just talk about performances, there's really not any position that might increase your performance if you're not comfortable on the bike, if you're not able to train on the bike and tolerate the saddle, the handlebar, the shoes,
Yeah,
whatever.
tolerate the training at the end of the day. And if you have better, we'd say, and when I say comfort, a lot of times people are like, well, that's not performance. But, your ability to train day in and day out with exposing yourself to an overuse injury is a
This is
critical piece.
performance.
But the other point here, Guillaume, that I think needs to be stressed with regards to bike position, bike fit processes is the safe handling of the bike, such as being able to brake and shift and have good weight bearing and balance over the bike to get the most out of the bike from a technical handling standpoint. And that, if we just go on comfort alone, that I've seen bike fit processes out there that really just only prioritize comfort,
You're right.
but then it really messes up the ability for a person to stand up and pedal. It messes up the ability to actually safely use the brakes, or if you're making a descending corner, if your weight bearing and balance is off on the bike, that tends to decrease the technical abilities of that bike. And so, really, when we're thinking about bike fit, bike positioning, bike comfort, safe operation of the bike, reliable operation of the bike. Those things all need to be considered into it. And again, when we talk about saddle, if our ability to weight bear on that saddle is off and it creates postural irregular adaptations, that's going to affect the handling of the bike and your willingness to spend the time on the bike to achieve your goals.
You're totally right. This is something, I think it's a educational process that sometimes I ask them if they are able to jump off the sidewalk on and off. And this is a good question because it's funny how the difference is like, oh yeah, for sure. And what? Why do you ask me that? And you're like, okay, because cycling is even maybe you just Zwift, but usually people they ride their bike in cities, and you need some security handling skills in order
Yeah.
to
But
make yourself.
and that might be a topic for another day, Guillaume, is
Yes.
just talking about like what are some functional, reasonable expectations. But to the point of like clarifying questions is one of the things that I typically ask around saddle positioning and saddle comfort, saddle tolerance is, can you sit up and ride without hands?
Yes,
Because that has obvious, well, to me, it has big implications as to saddle positional tolerance.
for sure.
And so there's reasons why a person may assume varied saddle positions, but for the most part, with regards to average endurance positions on bicycles, one should be able to sit up and comfortably, well, the saddle shouldn't impede a person's ability to sit up and ride without hands. And oftentimes, these poorly positioned saddles, particularly downwardly tilted saddles, are the primary causal factor of a person's unwillingness to sit up and ride without hands.
All right. So yes, maybe we can do a bike fit process monthly discussion about that, about the cues that we ask the cyclists to do on their bike. So to come back to the slide 14 about the saddle position, there's really three main options that what you can do with a saddle. You can move the height of the saddle. You can move the saddle back and you can move the saddle to the front. You can tilt the saddle down, nose up. So really the important stuff is that to understand is slide 15 that irregular position of the saddle, it always will have a consequence on the rider. So as
Mhm.
you said, the weight bearing, is it able to steer the bike correctly? And the point is that to make the saddle in the right position, as you put it in a slide 16, any saddle can be made to be bad with a poor seat post. That means that it's not it's not just up to the saddle. Sometimes the seat posts have too much setback, and
Mhm.
it's impossible to reach the good position. I had like this week I had a Trek Madone, the new,
Mhm.
and there's different two different length of seat post, and there's two different uh,
Setbacks.
setback. So you have four combination of seat post, and this was a big one. It was a 60 centimeters. It was a very tall cyclist, but mostly the torso. So finally, we had to go back and buy the shorter seat post because we were at the lowest position of the long one. So
Yes.
it's sometimes it's unfortunate that cyclists are unaware of that because it's a cost. There's a cost to this
Yeah.
change, and but to the point that what you said in slide 16, but it's always true. It's depending on how can you move the saddle. Some seat posts have less room for position. They
Yes,
have
that's right.
some of them you cannot move the tilt uh, infinitely. You have like steps
Yeah,
to keep.
limited.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the seat post limitation of having these grooves and furrows, which limit the ability to very make small angular changes. And
because
the small angular changes are really
yeah,
critical
what
in.
I what we observe in clinic is that a 1 degree change in the saddle tilt will be felt by the cyclist,
Oh,
and usually when I tell to them like the minimal detectable change that you're able to feel, because you have a lot of nervous system in the, you say midline, center line,
yeah,
everyone. So you're able to feel this difference, and I need to test those small adjustment with inclinometer
yeah,
or whatever to make. So yes,
yeah. So, the thing that we will keep coming back to in our discussions is really, we'd say, this reaction to gravity, because we're all accountable to gravity. So, as I like to say, and borrowed this from the plumbing world, water runs downhill, meaning if you have a downward slope, that'll gravitationally influence whatever's on that slope.
yes.
So, if my saddle is slightly downwardly tilted, I too shall downwardly tilt with my pelvis, which will then have causal reactions of my torso loading to the hands. All these, how we pedal the bike will be affected by very small changes in saddle tilt or saddle positioning.
So maybe we can split this last. We'll try to make it 10 minutes because we will be running out of time.
We're out of
It's so much fun every time we talk. But the thing is, maybe for the audience, for the listeners and the viewers, we can start with the height. So usually what we do in clinic, I will take the lead on this one, and you can
time.
put your information after. The what we do is usually we decide the height of the saddle by assessing knee angle at the greatest point of extension in the leg. We are, I would say, we are able to do that in a humble way, but doing goniometry is a really reliable means to measure the knee angle at the greatest point of extension. This is a static measurement that we are doing. There's a great amount of practice in goniometry when we are studying physical therapy in university, and we are practicing a lot. I'm still getting better each day without knowing that, without remarking that improvement around the skills. But the fact is that we assess the saddle relative. I wouldn't say the perfect saddle height, but we are aiming for a range of biomechanical efficiency with the
Efficacy,
saddle. Yes.
efficiency, yeah, understood.
So what we do with the saddle height is usually we as you said, we warm up the cyclist and then we assess the knee angle. But don't forget that all those parameters around the saddle position, it can be the height, the 4.5, the tilt up or down. They will all have impact on the knee. So it's really a matter of practicing and solving those problems day in day out to really see patterns in that. So if you
Mhm.
tilt the saddle downward, you will increase your knee angle at the greatest point of extension compared to a nose up saddle because you have the pelvis who will rotate on the saddle. So this is my 2 cents on the saddle height. Uh, is there anything else about the saddle height that that can help cyclists maybe not to
Well,
achieve overextension?
yeah. So really, when we look at saddle height, at some point, if the saddle becomes too high, what we'll see is uh, an assumption of asymmetry of knee angle at the greatest point of extension in their normal pedaling, which can sometimes look like a leg length discrepancy or sometimes look as rocking on the saddle. So really what we do clinically is we initially evaluate where the person's saddle height is based on our angular measures, and then we have our starting point. Whether it's the saddle shapes and size, it's the knee angle, whether it's, we've talked about having the start of a conversation. And so we establish a good baseline position for a person and then see what happens. And then, there's not, I think with regards to clinical bike fit, we'd say industry bike fit, we have to be very careful with regards to what we promise. A one-off bike fit that's going to deliver your dream bike position that's going to be good for you for the rest of your life is a ridiculous promise. So again, when we talk about position in the saddle, we look at saddle height as a primary piece based on knee angle. Saddles that are considered too low for pedaling efficiency and all will always tend to feel way more comfortable than saddles that, as we start to get up to optimal position for efficiencies, that's when you start to appreciate or better appreciate your intolerances of a given saddle.
Thank you. That was quick. If we talk about the fore and aft of the saddle, um, usually what people have in their mind is the cups, the knee over
Oh, the knee over
pedals.
pedal, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so it's up for debate, but it's again, I think it's a starting point of the
that's
bike
right,
fitting process.
yeah,
We are working at the clinic. I will show you this later on, but we are working on a scale from what does the cops do depending on the cycling
yeah,
discipline. It's for
yeah,
the upcoming class that we are working on. But
yeah,
so the usually if we are talking about recreational road bike cyclist or gravel cyclist, there will be slight differences around the knee over pedal spindle. Where do you take the measurement? It's always a
yeah,
big
yeah.
concern. Uh, what is your? You have 1 minute. What do we do with the cops?
Well, again, it's a start. It's a start of a conversation, and really, when we think of, I'll reference it as saddle fore and aft.
Yes.
When we look at saddle fore and aft as kind of demonstrative where that knee is in relationship to pedal spindle, that affects a person's relative weight distribution over the bike or over the wheelbase.
Yes.
And that has technical handling implications. It also has implications, say, if a saddle is way far back, it has implications as to how we use or weight bear or load the knee in pedaling. And so really when we have the start of our conversation, we tend to get a person more centered over their bike. We know that aerodynamic cyclists tend to be far forward to no consequence. And for some off-road bicyclists, they tend to move back to get better kind of play of their front wheel or ability to operate their front wheel over objects and things. And so really there's again kind of some technical questions that need to be answered, but it really is the start of a conversation, and you're just using it to kind of get a better understanding of where a person is over their bike and how that might influence the handling of the bike or a person's pedaling abilities.
I think what we can say about the knee over pedal spindle is mostly it's as one of our colleague in France, Pierre-Yves, told us in a very French way. It's kind of a bike fit window because French, they
Yeah.
don't speak French, they speak English. So he said, "Oh, it's you need to put the cyclist in the bike fit window." And really, COPS is all about like, are you moving the saddle forward in order to aim in that direction, or is the saddle too much backward or too much forward. Usually, it's
Yeah.
what we see most in clinic is that the saddle is way back. So this
Yeah.
is most of the time a
Yeah.
matter of moving the saddle forward. But again, it's a complex.
Yeah, I think knee over pedal is a great reference point. It's not like everybody has to be there. I think that when people talk badly about knee over pedal, it's because it's implied that every bicyclist should be knee over pedal in order for there to be health or for a
Yes,
person to be able to
exactly.
ride a bike. And it's not true. As you start working with cyclists, especially at a higher level, with regards to subtle, nuanced positional strategies on the bike, you'll position them differently. And frankly, when you sit and watch the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, Vuelta a España, and you survey all those riders, there is so much varied position on bikes that you can't say that one position would work for everybody.
Exactly.
So we have to be careful with our assumptions of knee over pedal.
Good. Final topic is saddle tilt.
Mm.
So I think one of the most important thing with saddle tilt that I discuss every day with cyclists is the fact that the cyclists need to be stable on the bike. It's not a matter
Mm.
of is it +1 degree, +3 degree, or nose down by 3 degree. It's a matter of are you able to cycle to pedal without your hands? Are you able to be stable on the saddle? So
Yes.
I won't give a degree angle of the saddle that is better than any other, especially not in this talk. But I think it's a matter of making the rider stable on the bike.
That yes, and to that point, once we've established that stable point, I think it's important that one could reference the angle of the saddle. And when one references the angle of the saddle, you're looking at the plane of the saddle from front to back, taking a measure and saying, okay, for this given saddle, this is what I may try to replicate in the future. We have to acknowledge that as saddles age and they get a little more saggy or broken down in the middle, that will require a mild angular change to reestablish a stable position. And so you have to be careful with that angular measure. And again, we've talked and referenced like a starting point or a good baseline for a given saddle. Once we've established a comfortable position, it would be then appropriate to take an observational measure of the bike on a level plane with the same device that you're going to use next time
Yes.
to measure. And so I don't know. It's kind of tricky. We have to. There's been much promise and much to do. The traditional thing in bicycle with regards to saddle tilt is you make the saddle level, where you're just doing level plane front to back, and that doesn't work for all saddles, not at all. And then the seat post, if we have limitations in seat post, you'll never hit it.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Thank you, Eric, so much. It was a very important discussion to start with. I think it's just the beginning of the journey with this monthly discussion, and I'm glad that we can start that today together. If people, viewers, cyclists, or athletes have questions, they can leave the comments under the video. There's a lot of stuff in this interview. I'll try to make some shorts with them. I think there's some very nice small 60, 90 seconds that can be good giveaway message. So if people want to reach us, they can. I put the email in the slides so they can reach us. We are teaching bike fitting all year long, and we would be glad to help you reach those bike fitting journey to become a bike fitter if you have needs. I'm in Canada, you're in the United States, and we already teach in France. And I guess that in the years to come, we are hoping for more uh, good clinician bike fitter because there's a lot of improvement to be done in this area of I think really it's a it's the word is good, as you said it. It's a clinician, a clinical bike fitter. So with the background in health and musculoskeletal um, analysis, because so much of the bike fitting process comes down to what the person is able to do with his or
Mhm.
her body, and sometimes we can treat those people off the bike and make them better on the bike. So thank you again. And do you
Thank
have
you.
any last word for this January meeting?
Well, it seems like it was just we've just been talking for 15 minutes, so I think that bodes well. It's either going to bore our audience or it's exciting. It's exciting to me because it's just it's fun to talk about. And again, there's starts of conversations, and we have to acknowledge that the that people are individuals and they need good advisement as to where to start with regards to their bike experience. And if they have a great time with their bike experience, they'll continue to be bicyclists, and that ultimately helps with the with populational health, improves a person's ability to uh, use less, make less greenhouse gases.
Wise word. Thank you, Eric.
You bet. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.